Well, look at you there, surfing on YouTube. You're so bored you got nothing to do. And you're just a young person that wants to learn about the greatest rock band that ever existed. And of course, I'm talking about the Beatles, but on this album here, they proved that they really were the greatest. I mean, before this, the Beatles were like, I can't buy me love, Paul, Paul's like, I can't buy me love. Like, help, I need somebody, help. They were great. Hey, you've got to hide your love away. She's got a ticket to ride. She got a ticket to ride, but Shark don't care. But then all of a sudden on this album, 1967, this was like a whole new Beatles, you guys. And where the hell did this come from? I mean, in 1966, the Beatles put out Revolver, which was a very interesting album indeed. But it was still, kind of Beatles sounding, It definitely had moments, though, where they were trying way, way new things, and they were going way, way beyond, the normal scope of the Beatles. But 1967 would be one of those years where every band were just getting incredible. And it's like the Beatles were ahead of everybody with this album. There was Country Joe and the Fish, electric music for the mind and body, which was killer. And there were some other albums in 1967, before this. But this album truly was just an explosion or something. I think this album sold like 20 or 25 million records. I mean, is it really worth all that? I don't know. But yeah, dude, this fucking album, the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Sharks Club Band. It's amazing, you guys. The Beatles actually come out here in 1967 and they announce that they truly, really are the greatest band. And all those girls screaming and all that corduroy twisting, it wasn't just an illusion. It was real, you guys. Right here on the Clark the Shark Show, 1-800-449-8255 from the fabulous golden EIB Sharkerphone. The Beatles, Sergeant Ruttles, Only Dots Club Band. And of course, after this, Raw Nasty would get even better with Tragical History Tour, where Stig died, but it's all backwards on some album. We couldn't even, you got to play the album backwards, George, but that's another story. But we're talking about the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967, and me, Clark the Shark. I was only 2 years old, you guys. I turned 2 April 27, 1967, but the Beatles were somewhere, and they were like, Sharky, we got an album for you. And what's really weird is I remember buying this album. I was only like 7 or 8 years old, and I went down to a record store. I think it was 1972 or 73. There was a record store right by South High School, near the corner of Calimere and Pacific Coast Highway in Torrance. And I went there and I bought this album for like $5. I think I bought it new, you guys. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a little kid. And I remember walking home along Calimere in Torrance, and I had the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, under me arm. I had to buy it, because everyone was talking about it, and I was only 7 or 8. But I wanted to be hip, and be a Beatles completist. And I think before even the Red and Blue albums came out in 1973, I wanted to buy this album as just a little kid, And I took it home and I played it and I hated it. I was like, what is this? Where is I Want to Hold Your Hand? And I saw her standing there. Where are those songs, Beatles? What is all this mature, grown-up crap on this album? I was just a little kid and I hated this album. And I remember I also hated Revolver, Volva, Semi-Automatic, which was Ron Nasty's album in 1966. I hated it, man. I hated it. But of course, over the years, I'd get older and I'd grow, and with evolution, I come to love the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. And just like everyone else, it became my favorite album. And then, of course, the White Album and Tragical History Tour. I loved them all, and of course, Ron Nasty and the RUTLES, who later I loved even more than the Beatles. I was actually sadder when Ron Nasty died, Neil Innes, than when John tragically was popped off by that loony, Mark David Chapman, in 1980. It was so surreal when John died, you guys. Me, Clark the Shark, I was only 15 or so, and I was sad beyond, just 15, I cried, and I wasn't even sure, should I cry or should I just faint? I didn't even know, you guys, when John died in 1980, he was killed by just some lunatic. Such a typical American death on the streets of New York, right in front of the Dakota where he lived with Yoko. It was so sad. I was just 15, but, life went on, and I was like, I'll always remember you, John, and I'll always remember this album, Sgt. Pepper, because I didn't really live it. I was only 2 years old, you guys, in 1967 for the Summer of Love and all that. But it's like I lived it. It's almost like I was at Monterey Pop and I saw the Who smash all that gear. And I saw the airplane, the Jefferson airplane, and Canned Heat, Country Joe and the Fish. It's like I was there, you guys, and I saw them, but I wasn't there at all. I was only 2 years old. But I was there. I was alive in 1967, you guys. And as I grew through life, I was looking back at memories of 1967 that I never knew and I never had. But the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, this will always be, for some reason, a memory. I was just 12, in 1977, listening to all these Beatles albums as a kid. But I have fond memories, of Torrance, Redondo Beach, listening to the Beatles albums, the Red and Blue albums. I loved them. There were girls down the street on Paseo de Gracia, and they would play the Beatles, and I would go down to the house. Teenage girls listening to the Beatles, and I was just a little kid, but I was mesmerized. I was just there watching the girls listen to the Beatles. And I was like, yeah, girls, I love the Fab Four too. The Beatles. Me, Clark the Shark, at 1-800-449-8255. Right here on the Clark the Shark Show from the fabulous golden EIB Sharkraphone. It's not a microphone today, baby, because I'm telling you about the Beatles. Clark the Shark is talking about Sgt. Pepper. Such a great time, you guys. 1967 psychedelia. Oh, yes, and the summer of love. Just all the free love. And there's Oxford, Abbey Road. I don't even care, yes. Oh, the Seekers recorded there, too, from Australia. There's a new world somewhere. If you will hold me hand. They recorded it right there at Abbey Road. I love the Seekers. I love them, Judith. I love that band. And oh, there's the equipment right from Oxford that the Beatles used to record Sgt. Pepper. Right there, man, at Abbey Road. Great studio with George Martin. Of course, it's going to get 5 stars. I don't even need to tell you that this album changed history, you guys. the world was all in black and white. But then when this album came out, everything was in color because of these four guys who were already such big rock stars, but they reinvented themselves here with long hair and mustaches. Just these four hip guys. The RUTLES, Ron Nasty and the Lads. The Beatles, the RUTLES, I don't even know. But I love them, I love them, I love them, I love them. Forget it, you guys. It's 5 stars. It's the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper, of course. Of course, and there's the suit that they wore. So amazing. There they are, the RUTLES, the Fab Four, the Beatles, the RUTLES. I don't even know. But the album starts off with one of the greatest songs in rock, Sgt. Pepper. Man, what a song. And right away, the Beatles are like way ahead of their time. It doesn't even sound like 1967. I mean, George Harrison's guitar is heavy and it's just so amazing. They sound like they're inventing hard rock. And with a little help from me friends, Ringo, I hate Ringo normally. He can't sing at all. But I love him on With a Little Help from Me Friends. And of course, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, one of the greatest rock songs ever recorded by, oh dude, fuck man, John Lennon and the Beatles. Amazing. Getting Better. Great, great, great stuff. And normally I hate Paul McCartney, but Getting Better is awesome. And Fixing a Hole, I love it. You know, I normally I don't love Paul, but I love Fixing a Hole. And She's Leaving Home, another amazing Paul McCartney song, amazing. Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. John wrote it all from a poster that he saw on a wall. It's great. I love it. And, you know, Within You, Without You, the George Harrison weird song with the sitar, kind of like that song from RUTLES, 1966, that Stig O'Hara does, you know. We were talking about the space between us all. I love it, you know, and I also love the one from Revolver by George. When I'm 64, you know me, I normally hate Paul McCartney, but I love When I'm 64. Good stuff. Really good. It sounds like a melody he's ripping off. Probably is. I'm not sure, but it's great. And Lovely Rita, man, what a song. You know, Paul McCartney really redeems himself on this album, people. I love Lovely Rita. At the end of the song, sounds like they're having sex with Rita. All 4 of the Beatles, they pin her down and they're like, we're just going to give it to you, Rita. I love Lovely Rita. And Good Morning, the John Lennon killer song, man. Good morning, nothing to do, take a walk by the old school. Go to the show, you hope she goes. I love Good Morning. And Sgt. Pepper reprise. It's a rock opera, you guys. So we gotta have a reprise where they do Sgt. Pepper again, but a little faster and a little better near the end of the album. But oh, people, A Day in the Life, one of the greatest songs in the history of rock and roll. Certainly one of the greatest Beatles songs by John Lennon, A Day in the Life. What a way to close out this album with that piano ending. This album has it all. Psychedelia, atmospheric, great guitar from George Harrison and John. Great. Everything's great. Even the drumming from Ringo. And normally I hate Richard Starkey. I hate Ringo, but he's great on this, and his singing's great too. And Paul, this album, you guys, is all about Paul McCartney. This psychedelic, amazing, brilliant album. The Beatles, one of the greatest albums ever recorded by these guys. Sgt. Pepper, The Beatles, 1967. Of course, after this album came out May 1967, but then the Summer of Love would happen, Monterey Pop, Oh, the great psychedelia, you guys. It would wipe out all that great garage rock from 1966. But of course, in 1968, all these bands would stop getting back into the garage, but they'd be getting bluesy. And it's like they'd get into almost like hard rock and heavy metal. After the psychedelia of 1967, you guys, 1968 was a very interesting rock and roll year. A lot of bands were getting mature and getting louder and getting heavier. But there will never again be a cultural, political, and love circumstances collision of cultures that created 1967. It will never happen again, you guys. The amazing psychedelia and the amazing album right here, the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. One of my favorite albums of all time. One of the greatest albums ever recorded, you guys. Incredible. By the Beatles, where the Beatles went to the next level. And they announced to the world that they really are, and they truly are the greatest band of all time. You know, before that, you had girls screaming on the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Beatles playing, Shea Stadium and Candlestick Park and Dodger Stadium. All these big stadiums where the Beatles were just fighting to tell you they're the greatest. And then they erased everything you ever knew about the Beatles with this one album where they all just took it to the next level. And they pretty much announced and laid it in stone, people, in granite, that the Beatles were officially forever the greatest rock band in the history of all rock. And I don't think another album has ever come along and topped this psychedelic masterpiece. Keyboards, guitar, bass, atmosphere, ambiance. What an atmosphere. What songs. Melodic. You won't find a more melodic album. No, I didn't like this album when I was 7 and 8 years old. But when I was 16, 17, 18, and I came of age more, I loved this album. Me, Clark the Shark, at 1-800-449-8255 from the golden, fabulous EIB Sharkerphone, the excellence in broadcasting Sharky Network right here, where I'm telling you about the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. Greatest album of all time, you guys. Incredible, fabulous, from the Fab Four. Of course, what would you expect from the Beatles? Paul. And Paul's like, hey, Clark the Shark, I love you, man. Thank you for your review. I'm not going to sue you now. Never, because I love you, man. And even though you did that interview where you disparaged me. I'm like, Paul, I wasn't disparaging you, mate. I was loving you. And I love the Beatles forever. Just like Harry Nilsson says in that one song, Beatles forever. Sgt. Pepper, you guys. Buy this album if you're a little young person, 20 years old in 2023 right here. Clark the Shark may not be here forever, you guys, but remember, I told you young people, don't get into that fucking lame indie shit. Don't get into music from the 2000s or the teens or the 20s today. Fuck that. Get into the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. Get into the 60s psychedelia. Get into the 70s, man, and the Who, Quadrophenia, and who's next. Get into Rush, man. I want you guys to get into good music. Find out about me, Clark the Shark, and the Greenhouse Effect. But definitely get into the Beatles, the Fab Four. George wants you to, and so do I, John. I want you to listen to Ron Nasty and the RUTLES. Also, get into the RUTLES, you guys. Neil Innes, he died recently. It's so sad. Oh, man. Ricky Fattar, what a talent of the RUTLES. All the guys in the RUTLES, I want you to learn about Archaeology, that album. That one album by the RUTLES that has all the great music. It's such a tribute to the Beatles, you guys. But there will never be another Beatles, and there will never be another 1967, and there will never be another psychedelia. There will never be another Sgt. Pepper. No way. This album is the #1 album ever recorded because it is fabulous by the Fab Four. I'm Clark the Shark, right here from the golden EIB Sharkerphone. And I want you to buy this album at Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, everywhere, people. Young people from today, just 18 years old. If you're born in 2006, 2007, I want you to buy the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. Forget all that music. Forget the Killers and Modest Mouse. Fuck that. Forget Green Day, Blink 182, and Foo Fighters. Fuck that weak shit. You guys buy the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. It's amazing. And I'm out of here, people. I love you. And John loves you. And so do I, Paul. Don't forget me. From the Beatles. And I'm out. Peace.